In a quiet week when nothing looked urgent, when markets moved sideways and no headline demanded attention, a staff accountant at a regional firm logged into her brokerage account during a lunch break. Her name was Claire. She was 43, drove a sedan with over 100,000 miles on it, and lived in a house that looked like every other house on her block. Her net worth at that moment exceeded $1.2 million. No one around her knew, not her neighbors, not most of the people she worked alongside, not the friends she occasionally met for dinner. She had not concealed anything. She had simply never performed it. This is not a story about deprivation or extreme frugality. It is a story about a financial pattern that operates quietly across decades, and that most people never examine closely enough to understand. When individuals begin accumulating meaningful wealth, a subtle decision emerges. Should that financial progress become visible, or should it remain private? On the surface, the answer seems personal, almost trivial, but beneath it lies a structural question with compounding consequences. Public wealth signaling has existed for centuries, from estates and vehicles to branded goods, and more recently, digital visibility. Consumption has long served as a social indicator of economic standing. The pattern is familiar. Income rises, spending follows. A larger home, an upgraded vehicle, more expensive travel, a rising fixed cost structure that absorbs each new increment of earnings before it can be allocated elsewhere. This is what economists describe as lifestyle inflation, and in many cases, it is the single largest obstacle between high income and lasting wealth. The data tells a different story from the one most people assume. According to multiple long-term household finance studies, sustained wealth accumulation correlates far more strongly with savings rate discipline than with visible income levels. High earners who preserve large margins between what they make and what they spend consistently outpace moderate earners who expand lifestyle obligations with each raise or promotion. The mechanism is not complicated. Compounding requires retained capital. Display requires ongoing expenditure. One builds on itself over time. The other resets with every purchase cycle. Claire understood this distinction early, not because she had access to privileged information, but because she had watched her own parents earn generously and accumulate almost nothing. Their income had been substantial. Their lifestyle had been designed to prove it. When her father retired, there was far less behind the curtain than anyone would have guessed. If you find value in this kind of structured financial examination, where the focus is on long-term capital behavior rather than short-term market noise, consider subscribing. This channel documents these patterns with the kind of analytical depth they deserve. There is a structural capital argument embedded in the choice between visibility and discretion, one that extends well beyond personal preference. Every dollar allocated toward a depreciating status asset is a dollar removed from productive allocation. Vehicles decline in value the moment they leave a dealership. Luxury goods rarely appreciate. High visibility spending carries an opportunity cost that, over decades, compounds into figures most people never calculate. Consider the arithmetic in its simplest form. A decision to allocate an additional $15,000 or $20,000 per year towards status-oriented consumption rather than investment, sustained over 25 years at historical market averages, produces a difference that can reach well into the hundreds of thousands. In some scenarios, it crosses into 7 figures. The numbers vary by assumption, but the directional conclusion does not. Research in behavioral economics describes a phenomenon called hedonic adaptation, the tendency for satisfaction derived from new consumption to normalize quickly. The initial emotional return from a purchase declines within weeks or months. Meanwhile, the liabilities and maintenance costs persist. The financial obligation remains long after the novelty has faded. Capital invested instead of consumed continues producing economic return. That asymmetry, quiet and unremarkable in any single year, becomes defining over a lifetime. But the implications extend beyond personal balance sheets. When financial progress becomes publicly visible, a series of secondary effects activate, most of them working against the person whose wealth is on display. Social circles recalibrate, spending norms shift, group expectations adjust upward, generosity becomes assumed rather than chosen. In professional and business contexts, negotiation leverage changes. When counterparties assume access to excess capital, pricing pressure often decreases. Premiums may rise. The very visibility intended to signal success can quietly erode the conditions that produced it. Financial privacy preserves optionality. Generosity can remain intentional instead of reactive. Business negotiations proceed on their merits rather than on assumptions about what someone can afford to concede. This is not an argument for secrecy or isolation. It is an argument for information control. If this form of long-form financial analysis is the kind of work you want to see more of, subscribing is the most direct way to support it. These examinations take time to construct, and the audience that values them is what sustains the effort. There is another dimension that deserves attention, and it is one that rarely appears in conventional financial advice. Decision quality. Status-driven purchases often originate from external validation pressure. When visibility is removed from the equation, purchasing decisions become utility-driven. The evaluative lens shifts from how something will appear to whether it genuinely improves long-term positioning. Over extended time horizons, that shift materially affects outcomes. The person buying a vehicle because it serves their needs reliably is making a fundamentally different financial decision than the person buying one because it projects a particular image. Both may spend similar amounts in a given year. Over 15 or 20 years, their balance sheets diverge dramatically. In business contexts, specifically, understated wealth can function as a structural advantage. When counterparties assume limited liquidity, negotiating dynamics shift in favor of the understated party. When excess capital is assumed, concessions become expected. Discretion in this framing is not modesty, it is positioning. Most people miss this because it doesn't feel urgent while it's happening. The decision to upgrade a lifestyle incrementally, year by year, never registers as a single dramatic mistake. It accumulates. Each individual choice appears reasonable. The car payment is manageable. The larger home is justifiable. The vacation is earned. But the aggregate effect, compounded across decades, is a systematic reduction in the capital available for the one thing that actually builds lasting financial independence: sustained investment in productive assets. Visible wealth also requires maintenance. Image consistency produces ongoing spending pressure. Once a certain lifestyle is established publicly, reverting feels like failure. Quiet wealth carries no such burden. The absence of performance reduces financial drag. There is a phrase that captures this dynamic with precision. The strongest balance sheets often belong to those who appear ordinary. We are approaching the framework section of this analysis. If you appreciate financial content built around principles and evidence, rather than hype and urgency, this is the channel for that approach. Subscribing ensures you receive each new examination as it is published. An informed response to these observations involves several interconnected principles, none of them dramatic, all of them consequential over time. The first is consistency. Wealth built through disciplined allocation does not require exceptional income or exceptional market conditions. It requires a sustained margin between earnings and expenditure, protected from the gradual erosion of lifestyle inflation. That margin is the engine. Everything else is secondary. The second is long-horizon thinking. Capital allocated toward appreciating assets rather than depreciating consumption benefits from time in a way that no amount of income can replicate in the short term. The longer the horizon, the more powerful the asymmetry becomes. The third is deliberate allocation. Every spending decision carries an implicit comparison. The question is not whether something is affordable. It is what that same capital would become if deployed differently. This does not mean never spending. It means spending with awareness of what is being exchanged. The fourth is preserving optionality. True financial strength is measured not by what someone owns, but by what they can withstand. The ability to absorb market volatility, the ability to weather economic disruption, the ability to make career and life decisions independent of short-term income needs. This ability does not increase optionality. Capital does. And the fifth, often overlooked, is that financial discretion does not eliminate enjoyment, it reallocates it. Wealth directed toward time autonomy, flexible work decisions, strategic pursuits, philanthropic endeavors, and risk tolerance produces a form of return that no status purchase can match. None of these require public signaling. After her lunch break ended that day, the accountant closed her laptop and returned to work. She would contribute the same amount to her investment accounts this month as she had the month before. She would drive the same car. She would live in the same house on the same unremarkable street. Her colleagues would continue to see a woman who appeared to be doing fine, comfortable, not exceptional. And in that gap between perception and reality, her wealth would continue to compound, undisturbed by the expectations, adjustments, and quiet erosions that visibility invites. She had never received a windfall. She had never earned a spectacular salary. What she had done, for nearly 2 decades, was preserve the margin between her income and her expenses, and direct that margin toward assets that grew while she wasn't watching. There is a question worth sitting with, and it is deceptively simple. If your income doubled tomorrow, would your savings rate double as well? Or would your expenses absorb the difference? That ratio, more than any market condition or investment strategy, determines trajectory. In long-term capital markets, compounding favors the understated. Not because discretion is virtuous in some abstract sense, but because it preserves the raw material that compounding requires: retained capital, deployed consistently, over time horizons long enough for the mathematics to do what the mathematics does. Build quietly, allocate deliberately, preserve leverage, compound consistently. The results, in many cases, speak for themselves. Quietly. If this approach to financial analysis resonates with how you think about building long-term capital, consider subscribing. Future episodes will continue this work, examining the structures and behaviors that separate durable wealth from its appearance. Thank you for your time and attention.